On this day, 1955, the New York Yankees and Brooklyn Dodgers square off for the sixth time in the World Series.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not-So-Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday morning here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today marks 69 years since Game 1 of the 1955 World Series. The Yankees, New York Yankees, from the Bronx against the Dodgers, but not the Dodgers of Los Angeles, the Dodgers of Flatbush, Brooklyn. On September 28th, 1955, the Yanks and Dodgers squared off again in the World Series. Now, both teams, technically, their organizations began in the late 19th century, early 20th. There's a lot of different thought processes out there. Like the Yankees were once the New York Highlanders and they played at Hilltop Park. But I'm sure there were some people that were saying, well, they weren't called the Yankees. They're not the Yankees. So forgetting that, the organizations had already been around for more than 5 decades. Everyone can agree on that. Because generally speaking, the modern era, and this is going to sound dumb, the modern era began in 1903. So you could do the math, because that was the first World Series, was 1903. And I believe it was William Howard Taft who threw out the first pitch of that World Series, I think. Just have that in my head. But the Yankees experienced extraordinary success starting in 1921, after they got Babe Ruth. The Dodgers mostly sucked. Right across town, from Brooklyn to the Bronx, a quick subway ride over. From Ebbets Field, Flatbush, to OG Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. The Dodgers had a lot of terrible teams, and in the 30s, they began to improve. But the Yankees, they won the World Series in 1923, 1927, 1928, 1932, 1936, 1937, 1938, 1939. Dodgers won 0 World Series in that time, in those years. They met in the World Series for the first time in 1941, a kind of a legendary World Series where the Dodgers in Game 4 had a chance to tie the series at 2, but their catcher, Mickey Owen, fucked up a ball in the dirt that he should have been able to get in front of, and Tommy Henrich, who struck out for the final out of the game, reached first base, and then all hell broke loose. The Yanks won that game and wrapped up the series the next day. I think Ernie Bonham was the pitcher. So the Yanks beat the Dodgers in the 41 World Series. They played again in the World Series in 1947. Yanks beat them in 47. They played again in the World Series 1949. Yankees beat them again in 1949. They played the 1952 World Series against the Yankees, and the Yankees beat them again, and in 1953, they beat them again in the World Series. The Yankees, in fact, from 1949 through 1953, won 5 consecutive World Series. That's something you're not going to ever see again. There's just too many layers of playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs? Playoffs? Yeah, there's too many layers of playoffs. Back then, team with the best record in the American League, team with the best record in the National League, played in the World Series. There's no layers of playoffs. The only playoff was the World Series. 1950, the Yanks beat the Philadelphia Phillies. 51, they beat the New York Giants after the Brooklyn Dodgers had coughed up a 13-plus game lead. Bobby Thompson's famous home run, October 3rd, 1951, also Dave Winfield's birthday. The Giants win the pennant. The Giants win the pennant. So you get to 1955. And you're a Dodger fan, you're starting to hear footsteps, but not the kind you normally would. You're hearing footsteps because the drums are beginning to beat that the New York baseball Giants and the Brooklyn baseball Dodgers are going to move west unless the teams get new stadiums. So you start to think you're running out of time. We have to at least win something. Heaven forbid the team would move west, but we got to win something. The Yanks got us 5 times in the previous 14 years, 41, 47, 49, 52, 53. Here we are in 1955. And the story of the 1955 World Series, I thought, as a young baseball fan growing up and learning about the history in the days before the internet, where eggheads such as myself just read books. I read a lot of books. My dad had a shit ton of baseball encyclopedia, baseball history type of books just at home. It was like a library of baseball books. And I was the kind of kid, if I was interested in something, I consumed, I inhaled. And I remembered a very high percentage of what I was exposed to, material that I absorbed. It's the same with movies. But there's baseball trivia that I learned when I was 8 years old that I have not had any reason to ever share because it never came up. It's up there somewhere. But as a writer, as a kid in college who had started to work on and write motion picture screenplays, I wanted to write another baseball script. I wrote my first baseball script. It was an adaptation of a book called The Biggest Victory by Alfred Sloat, my favorite book growing up. Really, really terrific book. Not one of his best known works. And Sloat's a guy, he was adapted a lot of times. At least 5 or 6 of his books ended up being made into movies. Finding Buck McHenry was one. I think, was that with Sidney Poitier? But there was definitely a movie based on one of his books that Sidney Poitier, the Oscar winner, was in. But I did an adaptation of his book called The Biggest Victory, and it was optioned by an Emmy-winning producer in 1997. We had all kinds of grand plans. We're going to go to Disney and this and Paramount, and this is fantastic, and I love your script. And nothing ever came of that because we couldn't get the rights, because Sloat's agent asked for too much. So that project died within a couple of weeks of me thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be rich. I'm going to be super successful. And hell, I'm only 23. Life is good. Well, life was good. I just didn't end up getting anywhere with that script because we didn't have the rights. And what they were asking for was fucking absurd for a book that was already 26 years old and it had been out of print for 15 years. We're going to put me in the permanent poorhouse. And I wasn't going to ask my dad for a loan. No, not necessary. No, thank you. This is a bullshit deal. I'm not taking it. I got to pay you $20,000 just for the rights. Fuck you. The author wasn't the problem. It was the agent who played hardball. So that project died. But I wanted to write a baseball screenplay that was mine, that was not adapted from anything, but a true life baseball story where everyone is a historical figure and you're not infringing on anyone's territory. There's no copyright issues. There is no, it's based on a book. No. So what was the best baseball story that I was interested in that had yet to be made into a movie? I couldn't have done Jackie Robinson because I knew even back then there were ideas, various studios had Jackie Robinson project in the pipeline. Even as early as 1997, this was the kind of information that was not that difficult to find out on the earlier days of the internet. So I decided the best baseball story that nobody had in development, as far as I knew, was 1955 Dodgers. As much as it killed me, because the Yankees were therefore going to be the bad guys, not really, but they're kind of the villains of the piece because it's going to be the Dodgers going against the Yankees in the World Series. But this is what I wanted to do. So I started researching. I put in a lot of time. And I didn't simply tell a historical story of the 55 World Series. That's too obvious. It's too on the nose. It's not that interesting. Because anybody can watch newsreel footage, whether it's 2024 or 1998 or 2000. Anybody can watch newsreel footage and check out how the World Series went down. No, I wanted to do something other than that. I wanted to tell a story about a 3-generation family living in the shadow of Ebbets Field during that World Series. So it is a confined location. It is a very specific time in history. The entire script takes place over 8 days. The script opens the day before Game 1 of the 1955 World Series, and it ends, spoiler alert, not long after the final out of Game 7 of the World Series. So I found a lot of historical quirks. There were a lot of things that took place right around that time from a broader sense that I wasn't aware of. The invention of the transistor radio. The transistor radio was a very new concept. And I had a lot of laughs in the script, and people I didn't know who read this were telling me, the shit with the radios, is that real? Yeah? That's amazing. That shit's great. The first couple of iterations of transistor radios didn't work right. They had the technology, but they hadn't figured out how to harness it properly. So the very first marketed transistor radios sucked. The second, which I think was a Raytheon, they got it right. And the main character has the good one, and one of the other characters has the one that just mostly plays static, and every 10 seconds, burp, 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 more or less. So I had a few laughs with that, and also the fact that James Dean, he passed between games 2 and 3 of the World Series. That was a Brooklyn guy. James Dean was a Brooklyn guy. And he died in that horrendous car accident on September 30th. That is an unbelievable historical coincidence that it happened during the World Series. And then there were other kind of cute little historical markers that the average person wouldn't have known. The future Yankee manager and a great baseball player, a Hall of Fame almost caliber baseball player in his own right, Joe Torre, his father was a scout for the then, I think they were the Boston Braves at the time. And I got to write Joe Torre and Frank Torre, Joe Torre Sr., into my script. And that was something that people thought was fantastic. I even wrote Walter O'Malley, the owner of the Dodgers, into the script. But every one of those things were based on the real history. And some of the history you can interpret different ways, because there are those to this day that see Walter O'Malley as basically Satan incarnate. And then there are others that see him as a guy who was just in a shitty situation. The Dodgers had to go. Ebbets Field only had 33,000 seats. 33,000 seats. There were no luxury boxes. And they only had 700 parking spaces with no room for expansion. They either were going to get a new stadium elsewhere in Brooklyn, or they were leaving. O'Malley's hand was forced. He did not seek to become Brooklyn's devil for all time. But everybody's in business. And he had no means with which to continue doing what he was doing. Los Angeles came calling, and the idea was if either the Giants or the Dodgers left, both teams were going to go. So my screenplay focuses on this family, the 3-generation family. You have a grandfather who goes back to the turn of the century with the team. You have the main character, his grandson, who is the best teenage baseball player in the borough. He's 16 going on 17. He's very intelligent. He's advanced. And he's in his senior year of high school. And the fun stuff with Joe Torre Sr. is that when we meet him, he asks the main character, whose name is Alan, that's after my father, he asks him are you willing to sign a contract with us, meaning the Braves, or are you dead set on going to the Dodgers? And the answer is yeah. He only wants to play for the Dodgers. So Joe Torre Sr. was a Brave scout, but since he made his home in Brooklyn, he was scouring the borough for talent as well. And our main character of Alan, despite his age, is supposed to be the best high school baseball player who is not a pro in the borough. And so you have this story where his parents start to go through some marital troubles through no fault of their own. And the grandfather can't bear to see the team leave. The parents aren't too happy. The main character doesn't want them going anywhere. Alan doesn't want them going anywhere, but it's not preoccupying him to the extent of the rest of the borough. He's got other things on his mind. And there is a lot of discussion of contracts and money and how should we do this and how should we do that and things that are appropriate versus inappropriate. The characters in my story are all fictional. In other words, the main people we meet. The historical figures are who they are. when we meet Walter O'Malley, it's really supposed to be him, but obviously this scene didn't take place. There's a moment where Alan and his girlfriend, whose name is Lana, I guess I could have done better with that name because A-L-A-N-L-A-N-A, it's like the same letters. But they have a moment where it appears that they're about to have sex. And they're at the terminus of Atlantic Avenue and Flatbush, which is basically, it was a tract of land. It was an enormous tract of land. It was one of the areas that Walter O'Malley had earmarked to Robert Moses and the city planners. This is where we want the new stadium. You're not doing anything with this land. Let's build a ballpark and let's build 6,000 parking spaces right here. So in the world of the film, the two kids are in the car, they're making out, and there's some random guy seemingly outside a fucking window. Some fucking perv. Well, he's not. It's Walter O'Malley, and he's not actually looking in on them. He is outside their car, but he doesn't even realize there's anyone in the car. He is staring at this tract of land. And when Alan realizes who it is, he gets out of the car. And Walter O'Malley recognizes him. It was actually, I thought, one of my most clever moments of the script. O'Malley was the kind of guy who was on top of everything, and he knew who all of the top baseball players were in the borough. And he sees the kid and says, Alan, right? Alan Kagan. I'm flattered you remember my name, Mr. O'Malley. And then they have an actual conversation based on the history of, we need this land or we are gone. And it is a kind of a humbling and a bit of a sad scene because historically we know that Robert Moses gave Walter O'Malley and the Dodgers the double middle-fingered salute. Walter O'Malley was just a fucking asshole. Excuse me, Robert Moses was an asshole. Brilliant guy, but he was a shit. He was a shit. He thought that baseball was a lower level sport. He didn't think that it was worthy of the kind of money that they were going to need. But then again, Branch Rickey didn't think that TV was going to help. He thought TV was a hindrance. He said, if you give your product away for free, no one is going to go to the games. Well, Branch Rickey was right about a lot of things, but he wasn't right about that. Because the expansion of TV coverage of baseball, boom, exploded the sport. So my screenplay, I finished it, I started to submit it, and I was contacted by a director who I had actually heard of, a filmmaker I had actually heard of. And he told me he absolutely loved it. He said, I was crying my eyes out at the end. I can't believe I got so emotional. A 16 and a 17-year-old, and I'm like, I can't believe how into the story I am. So this guy basically said, who do you have involved? And I had been working with a literary manager. That's like an agent, only a manager can get involved and produce the film as well. And so I'm working with a literary manager. I could give you her contact information. He said, okay, well, I don't have a studio deal. Otherwise, we could probably get this going right now. But so he, quote unquote, signs on. But all it means is we have one piece of talent attached. And yeah, it's my script, but I'm complete unknown. So to call me the talent wouldn't be true. You could say, well, he's a talented writer, but that's not what I mean. When you have a director with reputable credits and say, this guy worked with this person, that person, he's friends with that person, that's what we mean. Not just a random writer who turned out a script that this director really liked. After that, a producer connected with the literary manager, read the script, and she also loved it. This is amazing. It has a little bit of the romance angle really works. They come across like what would real kids in 1955 do in this situation. Just think of it this way. The characters in this story are based on people in my family. But remember, we were all Yankee fans. But the mechanics of who does what, a lot of it was based on real events in my family. I just tied it into the 1955 World Series. So growing up Jewish, whether it's 2024 or whether it was 1955, the most important thing that you can do is do what? What? Go to college. Actually become a doctor, a lawyer. Aren't you going to be a doctor? Very, very important. And it is a major component of the story, the primary character, Alan Kagan, the best baseball player, who is not a professional in the borough of Brooklyn, he wants to sign a Dodgers contract. He's not signing with Joe Torre Sr. and the Braves. He is offered a contract by the Dodgers. His parents say, no, you're going to college. And that's final. But he does not accept that. He does not accept what his parents tell him. And he is forceful enough where they actually leave the decision to him. And I also feel like it comes across as realistic that this kid who has tremendous respect for his parents, he's not a bad kid. He's young, he's brash, he's rash. He might end up coming around anyway. So there is a lot of this kind of stress, and there's other stressors. It looks like the mom is about to have an affair with a local sports writer, and the father has suffered an injury. He basically works in a metal shop like my dad's dad did before he got into the bowling alley business. And his brother, the other, what would be uncle, owns a bowling alley. So my dad's dad essentially is like two characters in this, although the bowling alley owner is named Barron, who was my mom's father. That was him. So I kind of mixed up some of the family stuff. But the father of the main character works in a machine shop making airplane parts, just like Grandpa Nat did years before he got into the the bowling alley business. So he's having physical issues. He doesn't know if he's ever going to regain sight in one eye because metal chips went into his eye and burned the cornea. It's not great. He's not in pain anymore, but he's scared shitless. So it's causing problems, the wife, the kid's mom, and all of this. So these plot threads all coalesce. And you hate to say that people's happiness depends on who wins a fucking baseball game, but much like in the movie Hardball, Keanu Reeves, whether he's going to succeed or fail, comes down to one more bet. Are you going to win it or are you going to lose it? Two for the money, right? Big Al, Pacino, and Matthew McConaughey, same thing. You can do all the right things, but sometimes it comes down to who wins the football game by how many points. So a lot of people really like this script. Kevin Costner, I know Costner got it. I don't really know that Kevin Costner read it. I was told by my manager that his assistant called her and said, look, Kevin just did For Love of the Game. So he's not making any more baseball films probably for years. But he wanted your writer to know how much he loved the script and how, under different circumstances, he would have wanted to get involved, at least from a producing end, because he thought it was great. Now, that doesn't mean anything. It means nothing 24 plus years later. But I like to imagine, as somebody who was already a huge Kevin Costner fan, on a random August or July day in the year 2000, Kevin Costner was taking a break. Maybe he was making the movie Dragonfly, whatever he was up to. And while he was taking a break, he read those 109 pages of my screenplay, An Empty Place, and smiled and laughed and maybe was moved, maybe got emotional. And when it was over, said, this isn't for me. But just tell that writer, if you speak to him, tell him I think he's got it and I really like what he did here. This is a great script. Kevin Costner. Now, another thing that happened was Elijah Wood read the script, according to his mother. I actually spoke to his mom on the phone, as insane as that sounds. His mother called me. Again, I didn't even have a cell phone. She called from a landline to my landline. And she said, yeah, Elijah is my son. I just wanted to reach out to you. We have the script here. But I don't think Elijah would be able to do it anyway because he's doing Lord of the Rings. He did a little independent film called Lord of the Rings instead of my script. Boo! Alas, despite a lot of real positive forward momentum, having people say, hey, we don't want to get involved. Dustin Hoffman supposedly read it and thought it was terrific. He was never getting involved. Billy Crystal supposedly read it and said something to my manager to the effect of, "It's Dodgers. You know, I'm a Yankee guy. I couldn't get involved with something where the Yankees lose." Spoiler alert. Unfortunately, the director who was involved and the producer, if memory serves, they didn't really get along. They were at loggerheads, and one or the other dropped out, and it ended up that they both dropped out. And that's pretty much been it. It's never been close to being resurrected. There are plenty of people who have read it and told me, wow, this is great. But there's never been any heat. That's the word we use, not the movie, but that's the word we use when you say, is there buzz? Are people actively shopping it or trying to get pieces together? There really hasn't been anything since, fall of 2000. And that's the nature of the business. If you don't know anybody or if you don't have particular connections, you need the dominoes to fall in the way that they seem to be falling to me before things kind of went sideways. The history, though, which was so fascinating to me is, spoiler alert, the Dodgers dropped the first 2 games of that World Series. They won the next 3. They lost the 6th game at Yankee Stadium, and then they won Game 7 to win the World Series. And so Brooklyn did, in fact, get their 1 championship in 1955. And that's what I responded to, even as a Yankee fan, who hated the fact that the Yankees lost any World Series to the Brooklyn Dodgers. But the following year, they all did it again. And 1956 was the year Don Larson threw a perfect game in Game 5. And the Yanks could have lost that series. It went 7, but the Yankees got them. And then the Dodgers moved west. And the great time, the decades of extraordinary baseball in New York City. The New York Giants baseball Giants at the Polo Grounds in Upper Manhattan. The Brooklyn Dodgers, Flatbush, Ebbets Field, which is now Ebbets Field Apartments. And the boys from the Bronx, the New York Yankees, at 161st Street and River Avenue in the Bronx. All of that history is still there. I just hate the fact that none of the parks survived. I hate that the Yankees tore down the Cathedral of Baseball. It's the Sistine Chapel of Baseball. We shouldn't have tore it down. George Steinbrenner didn't make that many mistakes after a certain point in history, like circa 1993. He stopped making mistakes. That was one. They should not have dropped the old park. Should not. Should have kept it and done a bigger remodel than they did in the 70s. But that's neither here nor there. My screenplay is still available if anybody's interested. I doubt anybody is interested, though. It is a niche story. It's not as big and broad of a baseball story as Jackie Robinson's story, or as big of a football story as Kurt Warner, for example, or Vince Papale. That kind of inspirational, heartwarming story. This is still a narrow range of interest. It would have to be somebody with a lot of money who is desperate to make, oh my God, I've always wanted to make a movie about the 1955 Dodgers World Series and the people who were involved. 69 years ago today, September 28th, 1955, the 1955 World Series between the New York Yankees and Brooklyn Dodgers commenced. And 7 days later, the borough of Brooklyn, dem bums, wait till next year, 1955 was next year. This has been episode 315 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Saturday morning here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, go Yankees. Peace.